Fiancé's ex crashes our engagement party and claims she's pregnant. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My fiancé grabbed my hand, swearing the woman screaming, "I'm pregnant," was a stalker, but his palm was sweating. Have you ever looked at the person you love and realized they were a total stranger? That was the exact thought racing through my mind as the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. We were standing in the center of the grand ballroom at the St. Regis, surrounded by 150 of our closest friends and family members. I had spent nearly $40,000 of my own savings to fund this flawless, fairy tale engagement party. The champagne was flowing, the crystal chandeliers were glittering, and Julian had just finished giving a speech about how I had saved him. I am 28, a vice president at a tech firm, and I have always prided myself on being fiercely independent and financially secure. I thought I had found my perfect equal in Julian. He was 30, worked in high-end real estate, and treated me like absolute royalty. But the illusion shattered the second the heavy mahogany doors of the banquet hall flew open. A woman in a wrinkled trench coat burst into the room, bypassing the shocked hostess. Her hair was frantic, her mascara was slightly smudged, and she had a wild, desperate look in her eyes. She marched directly toward the microphone stand, snatching it before the bewildered best man could stop her. The feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone wince. I felt Julian's body instantly go rigid beside me. He didn't look confused, he looked terrified. The woman pointed a trembling finger directly at us, her voice echoing through the silent, horrified room. She announced that my perfect fiancé was a liar, a cheat, and the father of her unborn child. The humiliation washed over me like ice water, stealing the breath from my lungs. Every single pair of eyes in that room turned to look at me, waiting to see if I would crumble under the weight of the scandal. I had absolutely no idea that this nightmare was only the beginning. To understand the absolute devastation of that moment, you have to understand the flawless facade Julian had built for us. We met 2 years ago at a charity gala I helped sponsor. He was effortlessly charming, wearing a tailored tuxedo and carrying a conversation with a magnetic ease that instantly drew me in. I had spent my entire 20s focused solely on my career and building my investment portfolio, actively avoiding serious relationships because I was terrified of men who might be intimidated by my success. Julian was different. He celebrated my promotions, bragged about my ambition to his friends, and constantly told me that he loved having a powerful woman by his side. 6 months ago, he proposed during a breathtaking, rainy evening in Paris, dropping to one knee on a private balcony overlooking the Eiffel Tower. It was the kind of proposal you only see in big-budget romantic comedies. But looking back now, through the lens of betrayal, the red flags were always there, gently waving in the background. I just chose to paint them white. For instance, Julian was incredibly protective of his electronics. His phone was always placed face down on the table, and he changed his passcode almost every single month, claiming his real estate firm required strict cybersecurity measures. There were also the random work emergencies that required him to step outside our apartment for hushed phone calls late at night. Whenever I casually asked about them, he would kiss my forehead and complain about demanding, wealthy clients who didn't respect boundaries. I never pushed it. I trusted him completely, blinding myself to the tiny inconsistencies because the fairy tale he sold me was simply too beautiful to ruin. I wanted to be the happy, adored fiancé so badly that I completely suspended my natural skepticism. I ignored my own protective instincts for the sake of true love. I should have known that a man who hides his screen is hiding his true self. The silence in the St. Regis ballroom was deafening, broken only by the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing through the microphone. "You're marrying a fraud, Chloe," she screamed, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "He was in my bed 3 days ago telling me he loved me." The guests began to murmur, a low tide of shocked whispers washing over the expensive floral arrangements. Julian finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He dropped my hand, the one he had been squeezing so hard my knuckles were white, and rushed toward the front of the room. "Security," he yelled, his voice laced with manufactured outrage. "Get this crazy woman out of here right now." He turned back to the crowd, his face arranged into a mask of pure, agonized victimization. He claimed she was a former client who had developed a severe, delusional obsession with him, a stalker he had been fighting to get restraining orders against for months. But Sarah wasn't backing down. As the hotel security guards finally grabbed her arms to drag her away, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of glossy paper. She waved it frantically in the air, screaming that it was a 12-week ultrasound with his name on the medical file. "Ask him about the burner phone, Chloe. Ask him about the Tuesday afternoons," she shrieked as she was pulled through the heavy wooden doors. The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice, but the damage was permanently done. My mother was clutching her chest, my best friend Maya was glaring daggers at Julian, and I was entirely frozen in place, my expensive silk dress suddenly feeling like a suffocating straitjacket. Julian rushed back to my side, desperately trying to pull me into a comforting hug, whispering frantic apologies into my ear about how sorry he was that this psycho had ruined our special night. I let him hold me, but my heart was pounding out a brand new rhythm of pure dread. The car ride back to our shared luxury apartment was agonizingly silent. The city lights blurred past the windows as I stared blankly out into the night, my mind violently replaying the events of the party. The moment we stepped inside the door, Julian launched into an Oscar-worthy performance. He collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands and letting out a ragged, dry sob. "Chloe, you have to believe me," he pleaded, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "She's sick. She's been stalking me since last year. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to scare you. The police said giving her attention only makes it worse." He paced the living room, spinning a wildly detailed story about how she had faked a pregnancy test to trap him, how she had been harassing his coworkers, and how she was completely unhinged. I sat on the edge of an armchair, still wearing my engagement ring, desperately wanting to believe every single word spilling from his mouth. I loved this man. We had picked out names for our future children. We had signed a lease on this beautiful home. The thought that he was living a double life was just too agonizing to accept. But a cold, calculating part of my brain, the part that made me a successful executive, was waking up. If she was truly a dangerous stalker, why hadn't I seen any legal paperwork? Why hadn't he warned our building security? And most damning of all, why did his palms sweat the exact second she walked into the room, long before she even spoke a single word? I nodded slowly, playing the role of the supportive, traumatized fiancé. I told him I trusted him, poured him a glass of scotch, and sent him off to bed to rest. As soon as I heard his soft snoring from the bedroom, I began my silent hunt. The very next morning, the fragile illusion Julian had built began to crack under the slightest pressure. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at my cold coffee, when his mother, Helen, called me. She immediately launched into a frantic tirade about the disgusting display at the party, aggressively defending her son's honor. "Julian is a saint for putting up with that girl," Helen rambled, her tone dripping with venom. "Sarah has always been prone to dramatics. Even last month, when she came over for..." She abruptly stopped talking. The silence stretched over the phone line, thick and heavy with realization. "Last month?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "I thought Julian said she was a client from last year." Helen stumbled over her words, nervously backtracking and claiming she misspoke because she was so incredibly stressed by the scandal. I hung up the phone just as Maya, my fiercely protective best friend, walked into the kitchen using her spare key. She took one look at my pale face, grabbed my coffee mug, and replaced it with a heavy pour of white wine. "You know he's lying, right?" Maya said bluntly, leaning against the counter. "Have you ever looked at a man defending himself and realized he's just acting? He overplayed his hand last night." I told her about Helen's slip-up. Maya's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She told me that I needed to stop crying and start thinking like the ruthless businesswoman she knew I was. She urged me to demand a paternity test, but I knew Julian would just fake outrage or manipulate the results. If I was going to find the truth, I had to dig it up myself, completely under the radar. I promised Maya I would uncover his secrets, no matter how much the truth destroyed me. My first major breakthrough happened purely by accident 3 days later. Julian was trying incredibly hard to be the perfect, doting partner, constantly buying me flowers and cooking dinner to smooth over the tension. He was in the master bathroom, taking a long shower, while I was organizing some magazines on his desk. He had carelessly left his personal laptop open, something he literally never did. I stared at the glowing screen, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I knew looking through his computer crossed a line, but the line of trust had already been obliterated at the St. Regis. I nudged the mouse, waking the computer from its sleep state. His email inbox was open. Most of it was mundane real estate newsletters, but a sudden calendar notification popped up in the top right corner of the screen. It read, "Appointment, Dr. Evans, $250 Venmo sent." I quickly pulled out my phone and Googled the name Dr. Evans alongside our zip code. The very first result that populated was a highly rated OB/GYN clinic located exactly 3 blocks away from Julian's office building. My stomach violently plummeted into my shoes. A stalker doesn't get Venmo payments for prenatal appointments. I quickly snapped several clear photos of the notification and his recent email history with my phone, making sure to capture the dates and timestamps. I carefully returned the mouse to its exact original position, wiped my fingerprints off the desk, and quietly backed out of the room. When Julian emerged from the bathroom 10 minutes later, a towel wrapped around his waist and a charming smile on his face, I had to force myself not to physically attack him. I smiled back at the man who was actively destroying my life, knowing I now had my first piece of real ammunition. The Venmo notification was just the frayed edge of a massive, tangled knot of lies. The next day, while Julian was at work, I logged into the joint checking account we had opened specifically for shared household expenses and wedding planning. Up until this point, I had mostly been the one depositing funds, trusting him to manage the vendor payments while I focused on my corporate job. I downloaded the last 12 months of PDF statements and spread them out across the dining room table, armed with a yellow highlighter. The pattern emerged so clearly I felt physically sick for not noticing it sooner. Every other Tuesday afternoon, without fail, there was an ATM cash withdrawal of exactly $400. I cross-referenced these dates with my own digital calendar. Those were the exact same days Julian claimed he had mandatory partner meetings that ran late into the evening. He was pulling untraceable cash out of our joint account, my money, to give to Sarah. I dug deeper, finding strange, unitemized charges at a boutique baby furniture store one town over, buried under the label of office supplies/staging. He wasn't just paying for her medical care. He was actively nesting with her while sleeping in my bed. The level of sociopathic detachment required to steal from your fiancé to fund a nursery for your pregnant ex-girlfriend was truly staggering. I sat alone in our luxurious apartment, surrounded by the undeniable paper trail of his betrayal, and finally allowed myself to cry. But the tears didn't last long. The sorrow was quickly burning away, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and highly focused rage. I was done weeping over a fraud, and it was finally time to meet the other woman face to face. I used a reverse phone lookup site to trace Sarah's number, which I found hidden in Julian's blocked contacts list on an old iPad he forgot to wipe. I sent her a simple, untraceable text from a burner number. "I know he's lying to me. Meet me at the Bluebird Diner at noon. Come alone." I honestly didn't know if she would show up, but when I walked into the dimly lit, Greasy Spoon Diner on the outskirts of the city, she was already sitting in a back booth, aggressively shredding a paper napkin. The chaotic energy she had at the party was gone, replaced by a deep, defensive exhaustion. When I sat down, she immediately pushed a thick manila folder across the sticky table. "You think I'm crazy," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "He told me you were completely obsessed with him, that you threatened to ruin his career if he broke off the engagement." I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of printed text messages, clear dating back over a year. There were romantic photos of them taking weekend trips while I was away on business. There was the 12-week ultrasound. She wasn't an ex. She was his primary girlfriend. Julian had been actively dating both of us, weaving an intricate web of manipulation to keep us completely separated. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and smugness, clearly believing she had won the ultimate prize because she was carrying his child. She thought Julian was just waiting for the right moment to break my heart and officially move in with her. But as I read the timestamps on his text messages, I realized Sarah was just as oblivious to his true, sinister plan as I was. The true horror of Julian's betrayal wasn't the cheating. It was the chilling, calculated financial motive behind it all. While Sarah went to the restroom, I quickly flipped through the last few pages of the text she had printed. My blood turned to absolute ice. On the night we got engaged in Paris, he had texted Sarah, "The ring is on. The trust fund unlocks when she hits 30. Stick to the plan, baby. We just need to weather the storm for 2 years, and then we're set for life." My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I am set to inherit a massive, multi-million-dollar family trust on my 30th birthday. Julian wasn't torn between two women. He wasn't a tragic romantic making a mistake. He was a highly organized con artist. He was marrying me specifically to gain legal access to my impending wealth, planning to secretly funnel the money into offshore accounts or shell companies, divorce me, and use my family's legacy to fund a lavish life with Sarah and their baby. The $40,000 engagement party, the designer suits, the luxury apartment lease. I had been paying for all of it, serving as his personal ATM while he played the devoted lover. He viewed me purely as a financial stepping stone. Sarah returned to the booth, completely unaware of the specific texts I had just read. She thought they were conspiring to get his bonuses, entirely ignorant of the massive trust fund fraud he was plotting. I realized in that exact moment that I couldn't just dump him. I had to completely decimate his life. I handed the folder back to Sarah, pasted on a fake, sorrowful smile, and told her I would be stepping aside to let them be happy. Of course, I had absolutely no intention of quietly stepping aside. I drove straight from the diner to Maya's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles bruised. I laid out the entire sociopathic plot for her. Maya, always the strategist, immediately called her uncle, a ruthless corporate litigation and family law attorney. During a frantic, 2-hour emergency consultation, he instructed me on exactly what I needed to do to legally protect my assets and gather airtight evidence of Julian's financial fraud. The hardest part was going to be the performance. I had to go back to my apartment and pretend everything was perfectly fine. For the next 3 weeks, I delivered the acting performance of a lifetime. I cooked his favorite dinners, I kissed his cheek, and I enthusiastically discussed wedding floral arrangements, all while feeling violently ill every time he touched me. When he was asleep, I was awake. I covertly forwarded all of his emails to a secure server. I took screenshots of his secret Venmo transactions, his hidden banking apps, and his messages to his mother, who was actively helping him hide the baby registry. Maya and I meticulously built a digital fortress of undeniable proof, neatly organizing every lie, every stolen dollar, and every manipulative text into a comprehensive dossier of destruction. Julian was completely arrogant, utterly convinced that I had swallowed his stalker narrative without a single second thought. He was getting sloppy, leaving his phone unlocked for longer periods, practically handing me the nails for his own coffin. But my quiet investigation almost came crashing down into a catastrophic disaster on a rainy Thursday night. I was sitting in Julian's home office, rapidly copying a hidden folder labeled escrow/SR from his desktop onto a tiny, encrypted USB flash drive. He was supposed to be at a client dinner across town, giving me at least a 2-hour window to work. The progress bar on the screen agonizingly ticked up. 80%, 85%, 90%. Suddenly, I heard the heavy deadbolt of the front door slide open, followed by the familiar thud of his expensive leather briefcase hitting the entryway floor. My heart leaped directly into my throat. "Chloe? I'm home early. Client canceled." His voice echoed down the hallway. The progress bar hit 98%. The sound of his footsteps grew louder on the hardwood floor. I frantically prayed to whatever gods were listening as the bar finally hit 100%. I aggressively yanked the USB drive from the port, shoved it deep into the pocket of my sweatpants, and slammed the laptop shut just as the office door swung open. Julian stood in the doorway, his eyes instantly narrowing as he looked at my flushed face and the closed computer. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice losing its usual warmth, replaced by a cold, suspicious edge. "Just looking for a stamp." I lied smoothly, forcing my breathing to steady. "I need to mail the deposit for the wedding photographer." I stood up, walked directly toward him, and wrapped my arms around his neck, forcing myself to endure his scent. "I'm so glad you're home early," I whispered, kissing his jaw. The tension in his shoulders slowly melted away, his massive ego overriding his natural paranoia. He smiled and kissed me back, completely unaware that his absolute ruin was sitting safely in my left pocket. With the evidence fully secured and verified by Maya's lawyer uncle, it was time to spring the trap. I didn't want to just break up with him in our living room. Julian deserved a theatrical downfall that matched the humiliation he subjected me to at the engagement party. I told Julian I wanted to host an intimate, celebratory wedding planning dinner in a private dining room at an incredibly exclusive Michelin-starred steakhouse downtown. I explicitly insisted that his mother, Helen, attend the dinner as well. To ensure they were perfectly primed, I casually dropped a massive piece of bait. I told Julian that my parents were so thrilled about the wedding that they were planning to gift us $500,000 in cash to purchase a permanent home, and I wanted to discuss the transfer details over dinner. The greed that flashed in his eyes was utterly nauseating. On the night of the dinner, Julian and Helen arrived dressed to the nines, practically vibrating with excitement over the imaginary payday. The private room was beautifully decorated with low lighting and expensive floral arrangements. We ordered vintage champagne and decadent appetizers. Julian held my hand across the white tablecloth, giving his mother a knowing, triumphant smirk. He thought he had successfully pulled off the ultimate con, securing his financial future while keeping his pregnant girlfriend waiting in the wings. He raised his crystal glass for a toast, praising my generosity and our beautiful future together. I smiled, picked up the remote control hidden in my lap, and turned on the large flat-screen television mounted behind him. Instead of the wedding venue slideshow I had promised, the screen suddenly illuminated with a massive, high-definition screenshot of the text message Julian sent from Paris. The trust fund unlocks when she hits 30. Stick to the plan, baby. The clinking of glasses stopped instantly. Helen gasped, dropping her fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. Julian slowly turned around to look at the screen, all the color violently draining from his handsome face. I didn't stop there. I pressed the remote, cycling through a devastating presentation of his sins. Up went the bank statements highlighting the stolen cash. Up went the Venmo receipts for the prenatal care. Up went the text messages from Helen, actively discussing how to hide Sarah's baby shower from me. What is this? Julian stammered, his voice trembling as his perfect facade completely shattered. It's your real life, Julian, I said, my voice ice-cold and steady. I reached under the table and pulled out two thick, leather-bound folders, tossing one to him and one to his horrified mother. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every single text. It's all in there. Julian tried to pivot, desperately reaching for my hand, launching into a pathetic, panicked monologue about how the texts were taken out of context, how he was confused and pressured. But the undeniable proof was literally glowing brightly against the wall. When he realized he couldn't charm his way out, his mask fully slipped. His eyes turned dark, and he called me a cold, arrogant bitch who thought money could buy love. I calmly took a sip of my champagne, completely unfazed by the pathetic monster raging across the table. I stood up, threw a $100 bill on the table to cover my champagne, and looked down at Julian one last time. My security team has already packed your belongings. Your bags are sitting on the curb outside my apartment building, I told him calmly. Do not ever contact me again. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving him and his weeping mother to face the reality of their shattered scam. The fallout over the next few weeks was absolutely spectacular. I didn't keep his secrets. I emailed the entire digital dossier, the texts, the financial theft, the pregnancy evidence, to his conservative boss at the real estate firm, citing ethical concerns about his handling of large sums of money. He was fired within 48 hours. I sent the same folder to his groomsmen, his extended family, and our mutual friends. The social exile was swift and merciless. Julian tried to spin a narrative that I was a crazy, vindictive ex, but the receipts were entirely bulletproof. Without my income, he couldn't afford the lifestyle he had promised Sarah. The last I heard, the stress of the exposure and his sudden unemployment caused a massive rift between them, and Sarah ended up moving back into her parents' basement across the country, taking the baby with her. Julian is currently living in a cramped studio apartment, working a mid-level sales job, and completely estranged from the social circles he worked so desperately hard to climb. I reclaimed every single stolen dollar through my lawyer's aggressive threat of a wire fraud lawsuit. He tried to use me as a stepping stone to wealth, but he ended up completely drowning himself in his own toxic greed. It has been exactly 1 year since the engagement party crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. The healing process wasn't overnight. I spent months in intensive therapy, untangling the deep betrayal and learning how to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner. It is a terrifying realization that someone can sleep next to you, kiss you, and plan a future with you, all while viewing you purely as a financial asset. But surviving that level of sociopathic manipulation made me incredibly resilient. I am currently sitting on the balcony of a beautiful new condo I bought entirely on my own, watching the sunset over the city skyline. I kept my career, I kept my dignity, and most importantly, I kept my fiercely protective circle of friends who refused to let me ignore the truth. If there is one piece of advice I can offer to anyone reading this, it is to fiercely trust your gut instinct. If a red flag waves, if he guards his phone, if timelines don't add up, if his palm sweats when it shouldn't, do not paint it white for the sake of a fairy tale. Real love does not require you to constantly suppress your intuition or ignore glaring inconsistencies. When someone shows you they are wearing a mask, do not wait for them to take it off. Rip it off yourself. You are capable of surviving the heartbreak, but you cannot survive the lie. I lost a fiancé that night, but I gained the ultimate power of my own unshakable truth.